I'm Sally Lockwood, and on this Sky News Daily, we're taking a look at this guy.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your governor speaking.
Today's training evolution, dogfighting, taking on the corporate media.
The rules of engagement are as follows. Number one,
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis cast himself as Maverick in a Top Gun-inspired campaign advert last year.
Does it say that in the bill? I'm asking you to tell me what's in the bill.
It was pretty cheesy and was quickly pulled. But the 44-year-old Republican is no stranger to eye-catching ads to get his messages across.
We fight the woke in the legislature. We fight the woke in the corporations. We fight the woke in the schools. We never, ever surrender to the woke mob. We have made Florida the state where woke goes to die. Thank you so much.
His aim? To become America's next president. So, who is Ron DeSantis? And crucially, can he beat Donald Trump to win the Republican nomination? Our US correspondent Mark Stone joins me from Florida. There too is Kirby Wilson, who's the state government reporter for the Tampa Bay Times. Mark, for many, Ron DeSantis is the name that has stood out as the Trump alternative for Republicans. What are you hearing from voters in Florida?
If you look at the polls, his approval rating compared to Trump is nothing. He's ahead of the rest of the pack, but Trump is way far ahead and seems to continue to own the Republican Party. But if there is someone that Trump is worried about, then it is Ron DeSantis. He won the governorship down in Florida first time round by really not very much, and yet last year he won it by a landslide. A lot of that, people say, is thanks to the platform that Donald Trump gave him, and yet the two have now fallen out an awful lot. In terms of his chances, I've heard this a lot, that he's Trump without the chaos. So therefore, can he perhaps deliver in a way that Trump was not always able to? And that makes him either a very exciting candidate or a very scary one, depending on your viewpoint.
Kirby, you've met Ron DeSantis a number of times. How do you think he's going to fare against his Florida neighbor, Donald Trump?
I wouldn't count him out. The polls are what they are. Trump is up by 30 plus points, but there hasn't been a vote cast and there won't be for 6 months. DeSantis is sitting on some $80 million just left over from his last election that he can use for his presidential run using some financial chicanery that the U.S. campaign finance law allows. And he has widespread name recognition. A lot of those in the donor class, like Mark alluded to, are sick of the Trump chaos factor, are attracted to somebody like DeSantis, who has a tiny, tiny inner circle that never leaks to the press, doesn't backstab each other like the way that Trump's inner circle does.
What else do we know about him, Mark?
His backstory is fascinating. His education was about as establishment as it gets. Ivy League, he was at Yale and then Harvard. That's like being at Oxford and then Cambridge. He did both. He was the captain of the baseball team at Yale. That's a big deal in America. He went on to join the Navy. He was a lawyer in the military. He served in Guantanamo Bay, a time which he doesn't talk about much. He was in Iraq as well, and not just in Iraq. He served as a lawyer with the Navy SEALs in Fallujah, in Anbar province, the very most dangerous part of Iraq in 2004, 2005. He was the guy who would be on those operations telling the Navy SEALs, you can engage here, you can shoot that person, but you can't shoot that person. So he's got a background which makes him a very attractive sort of action man for those that like that sort of thing.
He's had some very interesting campaign videos, hasn't he, Kirby? And certainly there was a pretty powerful one featuring his wife that made quite a difference for him when he was running for governor of Florida.
Just like in the 2024 presidential race, DeSantis came into the 2018 race for governor as a pretty substantial underdog to a very well-funded, establishment-backed candidate. So DeSantis is sort of having to make a similar political comeback, and the main tool in his toolbox initially was that endorsement from President Trump that Mark alluded to earlier. And the way that he sort of made his name with voters in that race was by cutting an ad in which his wife, sort of in a tongue-in-cheek way, says, a lot of people think Ron is all about Donald Trump, but there's really so much more to him.
Everyone knows my husband, Ron DeSantis, is endorsed by President Trump, but he's also an amazing dad.
It cuts to him
Ron
playing with his kids, and he's teaching his young kid to build a wall out of blocks.
Then Mr. Trump said, "You're fired."
I love that part.
He's teaching
And
Madison's
he's
talk.
reading a Trump Make America Great Again sign.
People say Ron's all Trump, but he is so much more.
Big league. So good.
I just thought you should know.
Ron DeSantis for governor.
So he's sort of playing off of this idea that he's all about Trump in a sort of self-aware way. And there aren't a lot of times where Ron DeSantis is a super funny guy or very self-aware guy, really. But in these ads, he was a little more human. And it'll be interesting to see if he taps more into that as he runs for president.
Certainly those ads caught Donald Trump's eye and won his endorsement before, but they're now opponents, they're now adversaries, Mark. How is that going down in Florida? Who's more popular?
DeSantis came up with the tagline "Make America Florida," which it was a neat play on the tag of his old fan turned foe, Donald Trump. Donald Trump was all about "Make America Great Again." Well, now it's about "Make America Florida." What DeSantis is trying to do is throw forward. He's got these policies in place in Florida, and he's saying, "Look, the rest of America can be like Florida, like it or not." And there's no question. I mean, he won by a landslide here. People in Florida like him. A majority of people like his policies, like this idea of going back to a purer time. The vibe is that America has lost its way and needs to return to its traditional conservative values. And in Ron DeSantis, they are finding those values are being protected. I'm in Miami now, but we drove down from Daytona Beach, further up the coast, which is in DeSantis's old congressional district where he first started out as a politician. And we went to a diner, the Starlight Diner, which is a bit of an institution in Daytona Bay. It's cliched, you might say, going to a diner in Florida, but you get a great range of views. You only have to prod a little at the diners there as they eat their biscuits and gravy, which many of you won't know about, but not my thing. I really didn't find that everyone loved him. I was really struck at the first person we spoke to had a real problem with this idea of a war on woke that DeSantis places front and center. And this guy was like, look, I'm happy to be woke. I'm a Floridian, but I see wokery as about an awakening to the way life is now. Life isn't like it was in the 50s. People should be represented in all their shades, in their sexuality, whatever they want to be. But then at the next door table, I put this slogan, "Make America Florida Again," to an elderly white woman, and she was absolutely like, yeah, why not? Absolutely fantastic. Florida is fantastic.
I'm with you on the biscuits and gravy, by the way, not my bag.
Biscuits
either.
And gravy. What do you think, Kirby?
Well, there are different biscuits over here. I need to note that.
It's like having scones with gravy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's horrible.
Exactly.
And then don't get me started on grits. But anyway, sorry, we digress.
Let's talk policies, Kirby. Ron DeSantis has certainly, drawn his political dividing lines. Tell us about how his politics made a difference during COVID in setting him apart from other state governors.
The pandemic was really DeSantis' coming out party in a lot of ways. When the first cases were reported in Florida, interestingly, he reacted like a lot of other governors in the country, and he ordered businesses and schools, restaurants, bars, gyms shut down for in-person service. Everything was virtual. We were basically on lockdown for a couple months. Very little was open. Unemployment soared. All the things that I think would be horrifying to him today, he did. But he opened a lot faster than other states. As cases were soaring in the summer of 2020, he continued with the state's reopening plan. And by September 2020, everything was open fully. Kids were back in schools. All those businesses were reopened, and they never closed again. And not only did they not close, but a lot of tools that other states had in their bag to deal with the pandemic, local mask mandates, statewide mask mandates, local vaccine requirements for businesses, things like that, he banned. Local municipalities are not allowed to issue mask mandates under Florida law now. No business in the state can say you must be vaccinated in order to enter the premises. Not allowed under Florida law. All of that is due to Governor DeSantis' pushing. And since then, he's also voiced a great deal of skepticism about the safety and efficacy of the mRNA COVID vaccines. So all of that really gave him this unbelievable calling card with the Republican voter and the GOP base, not just in Florida, but across the country. People saw how open Florida was, and they came here to visit and in a lot of cases to move because it was a drag to be locked inside your house if you were living in New York or California or Illinois.
On the lockdowns, I think the awkward reality or the awkward truth for those who did, most of the world that did opt for shutting down is that the evidence is suggesting, and it's still being collated, I think, but the evidence is suggesting that Florida's death rate, when you take into account demographics, ages, and all of that, Florida's death rate actually was no worse. In fact, was better than the death rate in places like New York and New Jersey, where they did lock down. So he feels vindicated there. He feels that his hardline stance and saying, you know what, we're not going to lock down because we believe that it's better to keep the schools open, to keep people in work. He took that hardline stance, and the statistics appear to be showing that he was right, and he will run with that.
And since then, many say, he's used Florida as a petri dish for very right-wing policies, Kirby. He's restricted LGBTQ rights, curbed trans rights, banned abortions after 6 weeks. How has all that gone down in Florida?
Well, if you judge by election results, it's gone down swimmingly for him. He won a historic landslide re-election just 7 months ago. But he's doubled down on that slate of policies even since then. Obviously, the 6-week abortion bill was not in effect when voters went to the polls in November. That particular policy, I think, carries real electoral risk. That is a very extreme piece of legislation. Most people don't know they're pregnant at that point, and banning abortion at that point is basically it's tantamount to an all-out ban on the procedure. As far as the transgender rights, yes, he's restricted the rights of not just kids to gain access to gender transition or gender affirming care, that kind of treatment, but adults. His administration has cut government funding for people that were on government health care getting access to that kind of treatment.
For listeners who aren't aware, Ron DeSantis has also expanded capital punishment in Florida. People can also carry a concealed firearm in the state now without a permit. Mark, how much do you think that these red meat conservative policies are aimed at people in Florida, or is it showcasing Ron DeSantis politics to Republicans nationwide?
The abortion issue aside, he believes that there is a majority of voters in the country that these policies will really resonate with. And I think perhaps the most tangible one, certainly the one that's got so many headlines, is this book ban in Florida. And the headline, I have to say, is a bit misleading. He is not banning books in Florida. What he is doing is restricting access to certain books. So he is banning books that were never actually available in schools. He's saying that such and such a book shouldn't be available in school. There was one book called Agenda Queer, that he was claiming was available in schools. And actually, there's no evidence to suggest that across the country this book was available in schools. But even if it was, those who believe that sort of book should be in schools argue that we don't live in the 1950s anymore. We live in a time where teenagers have questions that they need answered. And books like these are educational, so say those who think they should be available. And there was another example of a book for 5 to 6 year olds in which two dads get married, or two male penguins have a particular friendship. These are books to introduce young people to different ideas, the different realities of today. Now, whether or not they should be available in schools or not, clearly open to heated debate. But he has made a stance and taken a stance that they shouldn't be available to certain age groups. And he believes that across the country, that message, that policy will resonate.
Kirby, this is all, of course, linked to Ron DeSantis' row with Disney. He's picked a fight with Disney, which is a high-stakes move for any governor. And it's all over these issues of gender and sexuality.
Governor DeSantis supported a bill called the Parental Rights and Education Act, which a lot of opponents to it have deemed the Don't Say Gay bill, which is a clever slogan. It's catchy. But what the bill did was it restricted education on gender and sexuality in grades kindergarten through third. So it said that in grades K through 3, we're talking 8-year-olds, a lot of its opponents thought, why are we singling out these issues? So Disney was one of the opponents of those bills. its past CEO, Bob Chapek, came out and said, we will work toward this bill's repeal after DeSantis signed it. Governor DeSantis took major exception to the idea that Disney would stake its sort of corporate capital on repealing a bill that the legislature passed. And so the argument that I would hear from lawmakers was, if Disney was advocating against a bill that affected Disney and its ability to put out movies or invite people to its theme parks, that would be one thing. But they're weighing in on a social issue, and that is inappropriate. So the legislature, at sort of DeSantis's behest, cracked down on Disney by passing a law that stripped Disney of a lot of the special government privileges that it had gotten 50 years ago when Walt Disney first built the theme parks here in Florida. Not to get too in the weeds, but they're suing each other now. And it all started with this sort of, I think, kind of overblown fight. I will say, as an addendum to all that, since that bill passed, the Don't Say Gay bill, it has been expanded into older grades. And so I think that adds fuel to the critics who said it wasn't just young kids that you wanted to not be taught about gender identity and sexual orientation. It's all kids. And that is basically what we've seen.
And Mark, this fight with Disney is all part of Ron DeSantis' big war on woke. How is that working out for him? How's it going down with voters?
Back to my diner, very mixed, even among Floridians. On the face of it, people who aren't, have got more important things in their own lives to worry about, they see this war on woke and they think, yeah, quite right. But actually, when you drill down, as Kirby just did, you realize that messages are mixed, and the common sense seems to have got lost in all of it. And that's certainly my sort of takeaway.
Mark, Kirby, before we weigh up whether Ron DeSantis has got what it takes to take the White House, the big question, can he beat Donald Trump to win the Republican nomination? Mark, your thoughts first.
It's a very bad idea to make predictions. So this may not date well, but my hunch is no. I mean, imagine the TV debate, the debate between DeSantis and Trump. I think Trump would do better. But come back to me in a few months and we can see if I'm spectacularly wrong.
Kirby, what's your take on it?
I'm getting 2016 vibes from this race already. If it was just Trump versus DeSantis, I think we would have a real question on our hands. But with so many other candidates entering the race, they seem to not believe DeSantis has the juice. And as someone who's watched DeSantis closely for a long time, he has not ever really been punched in the mouth. Republicans have run Florida for 2 decades. He walked in and assumed control of a well-oiled machine that was geared to pass his kind of policies. But a presidential race has a lot of factors that he can't control.
Kirby, does Ron DeSantis have a likability issue?
Absolutely. The Republican voters are mad. They don't want somebody who's likable. They want somebody who's mad at the same stuff they're mad at. Trump is mad at the stuff that they're mad at, and so is DeSantis.
On Tuesday night, we saw Donald Trump appear virtually at a Manhattan court over alleged hush money payments. And the trial date for that is March next year, right in the middle of primary season. Mark, how worrying is that for Donald Trump? And do you think he feels threatened in any way by Ron DeSantis?
I just wonder if a majority of people in this country are fed up with the chaos that surrounds everything Donald Trump seems to do, are fed up with the negativity, the anger that seems to surround so many of the Republican Party candidates, and whether they may well be deeply conservative, but they want something that's a little bit more hopeful, a little bit more unity, a little bit more bringing America together again. And if that's the case, Trump, DeSantis, neither of them is your man.
Hypothetically, Kirby, if Ron DeSantis does beat Donald Trump, if he did beat Joe Biden, what would it mean for the American people?
It would mean that there is a highly competent, deeply, deeply conservative man in the White House, which arguably we have not seen since Ronald Reagan. And I don't mean to take a partisan shot at President Trump by saying he wasn't competent, but he really didn't enact many of the policies that Republicans would have liked to see when he was in the White House. DeSantis poses a real threat to that kind of paradigm in America. He's competent, he is smart, and he's a true believer. His shortcomings, however, are that he doesn't have people skills and he has no interest or ability in doing anything other than what he is interested in. When Congress is so divided, you can't just say, I would like this law passed, please, and then it passes. That works in Tallahassee, Florida, where everyone is a Republican. It doesn't work in Washington, D.C.
My thanks to Mark Stone and Kirby Wilson, and to you for listening to the Sky News Daily with me, Sally Lockwood. You can watch Mark's report on the Sky News YouTube channel. This episode was produced by Annie Joyce. Our editor is Philly Beaumont.